Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful central Illinois. And today our question comes to us from Melissa Holland. And Melissa tells us that earlier this year she lost her daughter as a baby. And although she is normally sensitive to spirits, she has not felt her daughter's spirit at all. However, her mother-in-law has. And Melissa attributes this to the idea that it is simply too painful for her to sense her daughter. And I would have to completely agree with that. I think it's a very common thing to find people who are very sensitive to spirit, but the particular spirit they love most or would most like to hear from, they never hear from because it's simply too painful for them. So there's nothing at all unusual about that, and in fact it's a protection mechanism. And so I would say to Melissa, rest assured that your daughter is happy and safe, but simply not in a position to communicate with you at this time because it's too painful for you. Later, there may be communication. This, however, is not Melissa's question. Melissa's question is my understanding of the experiences that a soul who dies as a baby or a child would expect in the afterlife. And the first thing that I would have to say to this, and I'm speaking both from experience and from things that I've been taught over the years, is that it is a very individual thing. Not every spirit will have the same experience. It depends in part on the individual temperament and spiritual development of the soul in question. Having said that, there are a couple of things to consider. One of them is whether or not the soul has completely crossed over. This process can sometimes take time. Until they've crossed over, they certainly would continue to experience things as they were doing in the physical. If you have any question of whether a spirit has crossed over, you can do a crossing over ceremony and literally lead them over into the spirit world. And I always recommend this in cases where someone has died. I think it really should be a pretty much universal practice. Having said that, age as we know it, like time as we know it, really is not a factor for spirits. And it's always been my understanding and my experience that spirits are neither old nor young. They simply are who they are. So if someone who is very elderly should die, and you then work with their spirit, chances are you will not experience that spirit as elderly, but rather in the prime of life. And you'll find many examples of this if you work with spirituality in this way. It is the normal thing that would happen. Thus, if someone is, say, in their 90s when they die, you might perceive them in working with them spiritually as being in their 30s or 40s. My grandmother, who was in her 60s when she passed, usually appears as a woman between 35 and 45. And this is usually what we expect. So, the fact that the life ended very early does not necessarily mean that that is how the spirit will experience their afterlife. They'll experience it as who they would have become, as an adult person, for want of a better way to put it, and not necessarily in the form of a baby or a child. There are, however, exceptions to this. The first and most important exception is immediately after crossing. And very commonly when someone crosses over, for a certain period of time, they will continue to experience things as they knew them in this world. So if one were to cross as a child, one would continue to experience things as a child initially. Later, this would drop away. Or at least this is what I have been taught and mostly what I've experienced. There are further exceptions, and these would have to do again with the individual soul. During the first several years of life, many children are very much more aware of their previous lives than they will be later. And sometimes when someone would die as a child, it would be expected that they would more or less revert to a previous persona. And I would say that this would sometimes be something that you would find in their experience, that if you were to then contact the spirit, you would find that it is not only the child who had died, but all of their experiences coming through together, because the persona of the child was not yet fully formed. So these are some of the different possibilities. What I would think would be most common to happen is that initially the child would experience things as a child, and their spirit guides and loved ones around them would comfort them and treat them accordingly. And after a time, this view of things would drop away and they would perceive themselves as who they would have become. So, I hope that answers your question and gives you something to think about, and until next time, may you blessed be. The Common Book of Wicca and Witchcraft is envisioned as a copyright-free collection of spells, chants, rituals, and commentary dealing with Wicca and witchcraft in general, which people can draw upon whenever they like without having to worry about copyright, attribution, and the politics that sometimes accompany these things in our community. I think it's a wonderful idea. I certainly plan to contribute to it, and I hope that you'll join me in supporting it. You can learn more about the Common Book of Wicca and Witchcraft, as well as supporting the Indiegogo campaign for it, at the following address: witchlibrary.com. I hope you'll go and have a look at it, and I hope you'll join me in supporting it. And until next time, may you blessed be.